good day. This is the day that the Lord has made, and we shall rejoice and be glad in it. Friends, thank you for all the notes that you've sent through, the communique that you sent through to indicate how much you enjoy the teaching and the benefits that you derive from it. Now, today we're going to look at Moses and Jethro again, and we're going to look at the role that Jethro had played in the life of Moses, and just see a little bit more who Jethro was. Now, Moses, in a moment of rage, in a moment of anger, killed an Egyptian, and Ephesians 4 from verses 26 to 27 says, "In your anger do not sin, do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." Now, unfortunately, this is exactly what Moses had done, and because of that, he then became a fugitive, and at the age of 40, he fled Egypt, and he became a disgraced prince, and this disgraced prince now became a shepherd in the wilderness in Midian, and this is out in what we now call Saudi Arabia. Now, 40 years elapsed, and he was still in obscurity, looking after the what? After the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law. Now, this once tempestuous, volatile young man became a mature family man, and he had community and family responsibilities. It's amazing how responsibilities just force us to mature. Now he was no longer an immature deliverer, but one who became a reluctant leader. And we can even see that when God engaged with him on the mountain, that Moses reluctantly took on this leadership role. And so it was in the land of Midian and out in the wilderness where Moses had this life-changing experience with God, and he was mandated to represent the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords to the king of Egypt, whom we call the Pharaoh. Now, God revealed himself as the I Am. But he didn't just reveal himself, but he also initiated Moses a little bit. And the signs and wonders that God showed him were the staff turning into a snake, and Moses' hand becoming leprous and then healed again. Those were all just initiation steps, not for God's benefit, but for Moses' benefit. And unlike Moses' ancestor Jacob, Moses doesn't just sneak away in the night. That is what Jacob did centuries before. He took his wives, the kids, his belongings, and he slipped away in the middle of the night away from his father-in-law's house. Moses, though, he went to Jethro and told him what God had said, and that he wants to go back to and see how his people are. And Jethro actually blessed Moses, and he went with that blessing of peace. Now Moses, upon learning that those who wanted him dead had in fact died, felt free to go back to Egypt. Now this was a shadow for what was to come, because centuries later, this is exactly what happened with Jesus. Because Jesus and his family returned to Israel after the death of Herod. Now Moses with his wife, Zipporah, his two sons, they traveled back to Egypt, and on his way he met Aaron at the mountain of God. They didn't just meet just outside Goshen. No, they met at the mountain of God. And you can read about this in Exodus 4, verse 27. Now, Moses represented God before Pharaoh. We know about that. We know about the story of the 10 plagues and how the gods of Egypt, how the deities of Egypt were humiliated by God. We know about the first Passover that was instituted, the miraculous parting of the Red Sea, and we also know how they then went to the mountain of God, manna being provided, water provided, and so they came to the mountain of God. Now let us just pause for a moment, just for a moment. God humiliated and made a spectacle of the deities of Egypt. And he showed the world that all of these deities are beneath him. Now, it seems as if God is in the habit of actually doing that, of making a spectacle of the powers of darkness. Because centuries later, Jesus would come and he would do exactly that. He cast the demons from human beings and showed publicly that he had authority over the powers of darkness. Now, that's not all. Go with me to the book of Colossians 2, verse 15. Colossians 2, verse 15. And this is what Paul the apostle wrote, and he refers to Jesus when he wrote this. And he says, and having disarmed the powers and authorities, he, Jesus, made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. Now, the readers of the letter to the church in Colossians knew exactly what Paul was saying, because during that time in the Roman Empire, victorious generals will make a spectacle of the defeated foe, and they would be brought in chained, and the people in Rome would be shouting curse words at them, spitting at them, and doing vile things with them. And it was a way of how this general triumphantly came back into Rome, and that was the norm within Rome. Now let's get back to Moses and Jethro. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Now, where am I going with this is I'm actually trying to locate where is this mountain of God. But this mountain was very important. God said to Moses the following as well. And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. And so that is the sign. It's not all the plagues. It's not all the other things. But the thing that will show that it is God, the thing that will show Moses that it was God who had sent him, the thing that will show Moses, after going through all of these things, Moses will say, did I do this in my own strength, or all of these things? But God says, when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Now, where is this mountain? The mountain of God. Midian was located in the northwest of modern-day Saudi Arabia. And you can go and check on the internet and look for the caves of Jethro. It's located in a town called Al-Bad. And in fact, it is a tourist destination in Saudi Arabia, and it's open to anybody to go and visit. And now I will show you from the writings of Paul that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. Now let's go to the book of Galatians, chapter 1, from verse 15 to 17, and it says the following: But when he who had set me apart before I was born, and who called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son to me, in order that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately consult with anyone, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went into Arabia and returned again to Damascus. So we can concur, we can see here that Paul physically knew the location of Arabia. He was physically in Arabia. He didn't read about it in a book. He didn't hear about it from somebody else. Now also go to Galatians chapter 4, verse 25, and I'm going to show you again that Paul locates again this Mount Sinai in Arabia. And it reads the following: For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. There, he said it himself. He knew the area. He went to Arabia before, and he locates Mount Sinai in Arabia. No, it was in Midian, it was in Arabia, not far from the east coast of the Red Sea, next to the Gulf of Aqaba, that this failed deliverer of Israel found himself. He became part of the household of Jethro, and Jethro was a priest of Midian, as we know. Now imagine how Moses was surprised to find out more about God in Midian than he did in Egypt. And I'm going to show you why Jethro knew the ways of the God of Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, Jethro is a descendant of Abram, just like Moses was. Yep. Jethro was a descendant of Abram. Moses was a descendant of Abraham. Now, Jethro came through the line of Midian, and Moses came through the line of Jacob. Now, Keturah had 6 sons with Abraham. And Keturah, by the way, means fragrance. So in Father Abraham's old age, when he was a ripe 140 years old, he married again, and Keturah brought fragrance back into his life. And we can go and see this in Genesis 25, and we will read verses 1 and 2. And it says the following: Abram had taken another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. And this shows that Midian and his siblings, and Midian, who later became the father of the Midianites, him and his siblings, they grew up in the house of Abram, the father of faith. Now, as I said, Father Abraham was 140 years old when he got married to Keturah, and he died at a ripe age of 175 years, which means for 35 years, Father Abraham had these 6 sons with Keturah and raised them in his house. And then just before he died, he then sent them away. Now, approximately 400 years after Abraham had lived, Jethro, who was a descendant of Midian, was still largely following the God of Midian, who also happened to be the God of Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, but something happened, because some of the Midianites did not follow Abram's ways anymore, and they didn't follow the God of Abram anymore. And we can go to Genesis 25 verse 5, and it reads as follows. Abram left everything he owned to Isaac, but while he was still living, he gave gifts to the son of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. Now, imagine what Keturah's sons must have felt like. Isaac, you received all the inheritance, but we only receive the gifts. And imagine the animosity that it had caused between the descendants of Keturah and the descendants of Isaac. Just think that tension over the years, over the centuries. Now, in later years, some of the Midianites actually showed it, and they raided Israel and they oppressed Israel on numerous occasions. But Jethro was not in that mold. He had forgiven. He understood that he was not part of the lineage of Jacob through whom the blessing for the whole world flowed. And so Jethro was the one who then showed Moses grace and mercy. You see, the wheels have turned. The ones who received inheritance, and I'm referring to Moses, now are the ones who come to the ones who received gifts, Jethro. And the ones who received gifts are the ones who are showing mercy and grace and gives belonging, a sense of belonging. And so Moses learned more about God and his people, I'm sure, through Jethro, because Jethro understood the history. And he didn't just understand the Israeli history, he understood the history of the Midianites, and he understood the history of the Ishmaelites and all of these things. But Moses didn't just learn about history and how families operated, but he also learned about godly character. He learned about grace, he learned about mercy, he learned about godly worship, sacrifices, and wisdom. All of this in the presence of Jethro. Now, go with me to Exodus 18 from verse 1 to 27. In fact, I'm not going to read from verse 1, but I'm going to give a summary, and we're going to read from verse 9. So we know the story. They've now come through the sea. They are in the wilderness, and Jethro heard about what God had done for Israel. He sends word to Moses to say that he's going to come and visit him, and he would bring Zipporah and the two sons, because Moses had sent Zipporah and his sons back to Midian during that time when he was contending with Pharaoh. Now, Jethro heard about it, but he doesn't want to hear, he doesn't want to go on hearsay. He wants to hear from himself. Now, that's the type of friends and people that we should have in our lives. They want to hear from ourselves what God had done in our lives. Now, go with me to Genesis 18, verse 9. And so it says, Jethro was delighted to hear about all the good things the Lord had done for Israel in rescuing them from the hand of the Egyptians. He said, "Praise be to the Lord who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from the hand of the Egyptians." Now let's go to verse 11. Listen to what Jethro says here. Now, he says, "Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the other gods, Yes, even the gods of Egypt. Remember, Egypt was this world power. And so he says, for he did this to those who had treated Israel arrogantly. What it basically reflects his own heart, because what he says is, I will never act arrogantly towards the descendants of Jacob. And so it then reads in verse 12, then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the leaders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of who? Of God. I want you to note that. So here, the priest of Midian, remember, he is not a descendant of Jacob. He's not part of the eldership of Israel, but he brings sacrifices before God. Number one, the sacrifices were accepted because God was there. That's what that scripture says. Number two, God was not angry at the type of fire or the procedures or anything that Jethro had done. God accepted the sacrifices that Jethro had made. And in the presence of the elders, all of these were done. And so they ate a meal with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of God. We miss this so many times. But the presence of God showed that God was pleased with the sacrifices that this Midianite had made. Now let me continue and go to verse 13. And the next day Moses took his seat to serve as a judge for the people, and they stood around him. And when, verse 14, when his father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, what is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge while all these people stand around you from morning till evening? Now, basically what is happening here, an inexperienced leader, a leader of a nation in making, serving, doing everything by himself. And Jethro, through experience, through wisdom, counsels him and said to Moses, appoint other men, get other men to work with you, because what is this that you are doing? And then let's go to verse 17. Moses' law said to him, what you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourself out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. And so the salvation plan of God is in action, and it is Jethro who advises the leader of Israel how to conduct the business of Israel. And that's exactly what Moses did. And then Jethro left and went back to Midian. But now, somebody asked me last week and said, but Hildegard, you said Jethro is a man of color, and that's where we're going now. I'm going to show you that. Let's go to the book of Numbers, chapter 12. The book of Numbers, chapter 12. And let's read what it says in verse 1. It says the following. Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his what? His Cushite wife. For he had married a Cushite wife. Basically, let's reduce it. And this is what is being said. Moses and Aaron had an issue with Moses. They didn't have the guts to address it with Moses. And now they find anything just to have an issue with him. And what they do is they have an issue with his Cushite wife, and Cushite means black. The Nubians were black. The Ethiopians were black, and the Nubians and the Ethiopians, the Axumites, they were all Cushites. And I'm going to show you that even the Midianites are Cushites. Now, there are some scholars who will say that this verse does not refer to Zipporah and that Moses actually married somebody else, an Ethiopian. It's because they cannot accept the fact that Moses' wife was black and that Moses' father-in-law was black. Now, go with me and read with me what Habakkuk 3 verse 7 says. Habakkuk 3 verse 7 says the following: I saw the tents of Cushan in distress, the dwellings of Midian in anguish. And we know that Cushan here also refers to Cush, the Cushites. And this line here, the second part of this line joins in with the first part, because it says that the tents of Cushan are in distress. The dwellings, the same tents that they stay in, the dwellings of Midian in anguish. Now, there are a lot of people who said that there was no association between Midian and Cush. But here, the very same Bible shows that there's a direct correlation, a direct association in terms of reference the identities of Midian. And it says Midian is also part of Cush. Midian is also referred to as Cushites. Now, when Israel was in strategic need, it was this Cushite, it was this Midianite that gave advice. Jethro advised Moses to institute a justice system. And we can say other things as well, but so many times we now hear Africans can't govern. Black people, they don't know how to govern. They don't know how to dispense justice. And it is such an irritation, because right here in the Bible, going back, we can see not only Jethro, there are others as well who played a leading role in terms of governance, in terms of giving direction, in terms of knowing how the plan, the salvation plan of God needs to be unfolded and what needs to be done for that plan to be unfolded. And so, if you are an African leader, if you are an African person of influence, and you consistently show that you do not have integrity, that you do not have the qualities of leaders, you are actually spitting in the face of a man such as Jethro, who gave direction to the people of God in the desert. The man Jethro who gave direction to Moses, the leader of the people of God. And that's where I have to leave it. Thank you, and we will continue with more such teachings in the near future.